The Stonecliff cottage trembled under the assault of a relentless gale that dark November night, the salt spray lashing against the weather-beaten cliffs of Cornwall. Outside, the ocean roared in violent surges, while the wind howled through the chimney like a mournful beast seeking shelter from the bitter coastal chill. Inside, a meager fire sputtered, the only source of warmth for a woman who lived as a phantom in a village that asked no questions. A quiet existence in a life where invisibility was a shield, and every shadow held the potential for a terrifying discovery. Elara Vance stood before the trembling windowpane of the small parlor, watching the lightning carve jagged scars across the turbulent sky. The faint reflection in the glass showed a woman of faded elegance, golden hair hidden beneath a simple linen cap, sapphire eyes that held both exhaustion and a desperate resolve, a rough wool dress that disguised her noble frame. Yet the face that stared back at her seemed somehow haunted, like a prey animal listening for the snap of a twig in the silence. If you love tales of passion and courage, please subscribe. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We'd love to know how far these stories travel. A sudden crash splintered the door frame, sending wood shards skittering across the floorboards. The storm did not enter alone. A massive silhouette filled the threshold, blocking out the lightning, bringing with it the scent of ozone, wet wool, and danger. Elara didn't scream, she moved. Instinct took over, the muscle memory of a woman who had spent 1,400 days waiting for this exact nightmare. She scrambled toward the scullery door, her fingers fumbling with the rusted iron latch, desperate for the rain-slicked path that led down to the cliffs. A hand of iron clamped around her wrist before she could slide the bolt. She was spun around with dizzying speed, her back colliding with the rough-hewn wall, trapping her between the cold stone and the man she had fled on her wedding night. Sebastian Thorne, the beast of the north. Lightning flared through the broken door, illuminating the ruin of his face, the jagged, silvered scar that bisected his cheek from temple to jaw, and the hard line of a mouth clenched in fury. He was wetter than the sea, his heavy greatcoat dripping onto the flagstones, but his eyes burned with a terrifying, dry heat. "Going somewhere, wife." His voice was a low rumble, devoid of the shouting rage she had expected, which made it infinitely worse. "Let me go," she hissed, fighting the urge to tremble as she pressed herself flat against the wall. "I will scream. The villagers will come." He laughed, a harsh, rusty sound that scraped against her nerves. "Let them come. I have the law on my side. But I did not come to drag you back in chains, Elara. I prefer cooperation." He released her wrist, though his massive frame still caged her in, effectively cutting off any escape. He reached into his soaking coat and produced a folded, damp document. "Your brother, Julian, has expensive tastes for a man with no income." Elara's breath hitched. "Julian? Sweet, foolish Julian. What have you done?" "Gambling debts," Sebastian continued, tapping the paper against his palm with a rhythmic, threatening cadence. "Astronomical ones. Held by unsavory men in London who break fingers for sport. Or rather, they were." He leaned in closer, invading her space until she could feel the feverish heat radiating from him. "I bought them all." Elara felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her lightheaded. "What do you want?" "You know what I want. My Duchess. In my house. Beside me." He tucked the paper away, his eyes never leaving hers. "Return with me tonight. Resume your duties, and Julian's debt is forgiven. He lives free on a generous allowance. Refuse, or try to run again, and I hand this paper to the magistrate. He will rot in Fleet Prison before the week is out." Tears stung her eyes, not of fear anymore, but of pure, acidic hatred. He had found the one thing she loved more than her freedom. She looked up at the monster who had hunted her down, searching for a shred of mercy in his scarred visage and finding none. "I hate you," she whispered. "A sentiment I am well accustomed to," he replied, stepping back and offering his arm with mocking, rigid courtesy. "Now, Get your cloak. The carriage is waiting. The carriage was a velvet-lined purgatory. For 3 days, the world outside blurred into a grey smear of rain and mud as they thundered north, while the world inside remained suffocatingly still. They sat opposite one another, knees brushing with every jolt of the uneven road, an intimacy enforced by the cramped confines of the coach. Elara pressed herself into the corner, wrapping her thin arms around her chest, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear as she had done so successfully for 4 years. But there was no hiding here. Sebastian's presence was a physical weight, heavy and encroaching, consuming the air until she felt she was breathing only what he exhaled. She shivered violently, a spasm she couldn't suppress. Her threadbare wool dress, soaked through during the capture, had dried stiff and cold against her skin, and the damp chill of the English countryside seeped through the carriage walls. She kept her eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window, waiting for the mockery, the cold reminder that she had forfeited the right to comfort when she ran. She waited for the cruelty she had convinced herself lived in his marrow. Instead, the carriage shifted. The dark mountain of his figure leaned forward. Elara flinched, her breath catching in a jagged gasp, expecting a blow or a harsh word. Sebastian froze, his hand suspended in the air. A muscle feathered in his scarred jaw, a flicker of pain crossing his face so quickly she almost missed it. Slowly, deliberately, he unclasped the heavy black greatcoat from his shoulders. With a movement that was surprisingly gentle for a man of such terrifying size, he laid it over her. The weight of it crushed her, anchoring her to the seat. It was still warm from his body, smelling of leather, tobacco, and the unique, spicy scent of the man himself. "You are freezing," he murmured, his voice rough, as if disused. "There is no victory for me in your illness, Elara." She pulled the coat tighter, unable to resist the warmth, and dared to look at him. He was watching her, not with the vindictive triumph of a jailer, nor the cold indifference of an estranged husband. His gaze was dark, heavy-lidded, and terrifyingly focused. It traced the line of her throat, the curve of her lip, with a starvation that made her pulse hammer against her ribs. It was a look of raw, unadulterated hunger. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. In the village, whispers of the beast said he was a debauched monster who took what he wanted. But looking at him now, seeing the rigid tension in his hands where they gripped his knees, the bleak hollowness in his eyes that only filled when he looked at her, she knew the truth. He had not taken a mistress. He had not sought comfort in others. For 4 long years, while she had hidden in fear, he had waited. He had starved. And now, imprisoned in this carriage with the source of his hunger, he looked like a man barely holding on to the last threads of his restraint. Blackwood Manor rose from the moorland mist like a mausoleum of black stone, unchanged and unforgiving. The carriage wheels crunched over the gravel, signaling the end of the journey and the beginning of her sentence. When Sebastian handed her down, the line of assembled servants rippled with a collective, silent gasp. Eyes widened, whispers died in throats. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, pressed a hand to her mouth as if seeing a corpse resurrected. Elara held her head high, clutching the edges of Sebastian's coat, refusing to let them see her tremble under the weight of their scrutiny and the crushing proximity of the husband she had abandoned. He didn't take her to the guest wing. He marched her up the grand staircase, his hand burning through her sleeve, straight to the master suite, the rooms prepared for a wedding night that never happened. The space was opulent, filled with heavy velvet and mahogany, preserving the air of 4 years ago like a tomb. "Dinner is at 8, he said, his voice flat. "Do not make me come for you." He stepped out, closing the heavy oak door. The distinct, metallic clack of a key turning in the lock severed the silence. It was a sound that transformed the luxury into a cell. When the hour struck, a maid unlocked the door to escort her down. The dining hall was a cavern of shadows, lit only by a candelabra placed between their settings. The table was long enough to seat 20, Yet Sebastian had commanded her place be set directly to his right. He was already seated, pouring dark wine into a crystal goblet, the red liquid looking uncomfortably like blood in the flickering light. The meal was a battlefield. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating, broken only by the aggressive clatter of silverware. Sebastian did not eat like a gentleman. He ate like a man who had forgotten the softness of civilization. He sliced into his venison with jagged, forceful strokes, the knife screeching against the china, tearing the meat rather than cutting it. He drank deep, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, his dark eyes fixed on her pale face, daring her to look away, daring her to show disgust. It was a performance, she realized. He was wearing the mask of the beast she feared, testing the strength of her revulsion. "You pick at your food, wife," he growled, spearing another piece of meat. "Is the fare not to your liking? Or is it the company that ruins your appetite?" Elara slowly lowered her fork. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she forced her hand to remain steady. She met his glare, searching for the man beneath the monster. "The food is excellent, my lord," she said, her voice cool and steady. "It is simply difficult to eat when one is being watched by a predator." Sebastian paused, the knife hovering halfway to his mouth. A spark of something dangerous, respect, perhaps, or amusement, flared in his gaze. He slowly lowered the knife. "Then you best learn to eat quickly, Elara, because I am not finished hunting." The scream tore through the silence of the manor, raw and guttural, shattering Elara's fitful sleep. It wasn't the shriek of a victim, but the agonized roar of a soul in torment. She sat up, heart pounding, the heavy velvet drapes of the master suite doing nothing to muffle the sound that echoed from the floor below. Her first thought was that he was hurting someone, a servant, perhaps, punished for some minor infraction. The fear that had kept her running for 4 years seized her throat, but beneath it, a strange, compelling urgency drove her feet to the cold floor. She unlocked her door. He had left it unlocked tonight, a test she hadn't dared to take, and crept into the hallway. The screams had subsided into low, jagged moans, leading her not to the dungeons or the servants' quarters, but to the library. The heavy double doors stood slightly ajar, spilling flickering firelight into the corridor. Inside, the room was a wreck. A chair was overturned. Books lay scattered like fallen soldiers. And there, on a rugged leather sofa near the dying hearth, lay the beast. Sebastian was thrashing, his massive body tangled in a blanket, fighting an invisible enemy. Sweat sheened his bare chest, highlighting the map of scars that crisscrossed his skin, not just the one on his face, but burn marks, saber slashes, the brutal calligraphy of war. "No," he gasped, his voice broken, a stark contrast to the ruthless baritone she knew. "Get back, hold the line. I can't, not them too." He wasn't hurting anyone. He was the one bleeding. Elara stepped closer, the floorboards groaning under her bare feet. She should leave. She should let the monster suffer his demons. But the look on his face, twisted in sheer, defenseless panic, anchored her. This was not the tyrant who had bought her brother's debt. This was a man drowning. "Sebastian," she whispered, reaching out. Her hand hovered over his shoulder, then descended. His skin was scorching hot. He surged upward with a violent gasp, his hand snapping out to seize her wrist before his eyes even opened. Elara cried out as his grip crushed her bones. He stared at her blindly, pupils blown wide, seeing carnage instead of his wife. Then, recognition slammed into him. He released her as if she were made of fire, scrambling back against the cushions, chest heaving. Shame, hot and crimson, flooded his face. He grabbed the blanket, dragging it up to cover his scars, to hide his weakness. The terrifying composure slammed back into place, brittle and cracking. "Get out," he rasped, his voice trembling with rage. "Get out." "You were dreaming," she said, rubbing her bruised wrist, refusing to retreat. "You were calling out." I said get out. He roared the words this time, seizing a heavy crystal tumbler from the table and hurling it at the wall. It shattered, raining glass like diamonds. Do not look at me. Get back to your room and lock the damn door. Elara backed away, her heart racing, but the terror was gone, replaced by a profound, unsettling clarity. She had seen the beast unmasked, stripped of his power and his pride. And in the wreckage of his nightmare, she realized the terrifying truth. The man she had spent 4 years running from was not a monster who reveled in pain. He was a survivor consumed by it. The following morning, the manor felt brittle, the air thick with unspoken things. Sebastian was nowhere to be seen, having ridden out before dawn, leaving Elara to the tender mercies of Blackwood's true keeper. Lady Genevieve, Sebastian's aunt, presided over the tea service in the morning room with the cold precision of an executioner. She was a statuesque woman with silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull the skin of her face into a permanent sneer. For 4 years, she had ruled this house in the absence of a mistress, and she wore her resentment like a crown. You look tired, child, Genevieve said, sliding a porcelain cup across the table. Her voice was smooth, like silk dragged over a blade. Did the master's disturbances keep you awake? We are quite used to them here. Though I imagine for a delicate thing like you, the sounds of a madman are rather distressing. Elara took the cup, her hands steady despite the chill in the room. He was having a nightmare, Lady Genevieve. He is hardly mad. Genevieve offered a thin, pitying smile. Generous of you. But then, you do not know the plans he has made. Why do you think he brought you back? Not for affection, surely. You humiliated him. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. He needs an heir, Elara. Once you have given him a son, do you truly think he will let you roam free? The North Tower has a sturdy lock. It kept his mother quite secure in her final years. A cold dread coiled in Elara's stomach. The North Tower. The rumors in the village had always whispered of madness in the Thorne bloodline. It fit the narrative perfectly, the beast securing his lineage before discarding the vessel. It was exactly what she had feared when she fled. He wouldn't, Elara whispered, the doubt taking root. Would he not? Genevieve took a sip of tea, her eyes glittering. He was furious that night you left, raging like a demon. He told me himself, standing right there by the fireplace, that if he ever caught you, he would make sure you never saw the sun again. I tried to calm him, of course, but Sebastian has always been unstable. Elara looked at the fireplace, then back at the aunt. A memory, sharp and sudden, pierced through the fog of her fear. By the fireplace, she asked slowly. Yes. He threw a vase into the hearth, shattered it to dust. Elara frowned. But Sebastian wasn't in this room that night. He was in the stables with the grooms until dawn. I saw him from my window as I climbed down the trellis. He never came inside. The silence that followed was absolute. Genevieve's smile didn't falter, but her eyes went flat, shark-like. She set her cup down with a delicate clink. Memory is a tricky thing, my dear, especially when one is panicked and fleeing into the night. But Elara knew what she had seen. She remembered the rain, the fear, and the solitary figure pacing the stable yard, head bowed in what looked like grief, not rage. Genevieve was lying. And if she was lying about that night, what else was a fabrication? The coil of dread in Elara's stomach loosened, replaced by a cold, sharp suspicion. The monster in this house might not be the man with the scars, but the woman pouring the tea. Elara needed to think, and the suffocating walls of Blackwood Manor offered no clarity. She took the mare, a spirited grey that had been gathering dust in the stables, and rode for the moors. The wind was picking up, whipping her hair across her face, but the stinging cold felt like freedom. She pushed the horse harder, trying to outrun Genevieve's poison, trying to reconcile the monster she feared with the broken man she had seen weeping in his sleep. She didn't see the rabbit hole until it was too late. The mare stumbled, pitching forward with a terrified whinny. Elara was thrown clear, landing hard in the heather. Pain exploded in her ankle, stealing her breath. Before she could drag herself up, the heavens opened. It wasn't just rain. It was a deluge, a freezing curtain of water that turned the world grey and blurred the horizon. The mare bolted, leaving her alone on the vast, exposed moorland. Hours passed. Elara dragged herself toward a cluster of rocks, shivering so violently her teeth chattered. Hypothermia was a seductive enemy. It made her want to close her eyes, to sleep. Just as the darkness began to creep in at the edges of her vision, a thunderous sound rose above the wind. Hoofbeats. A black stallion burst through the rain wall. Sebastian. He looked like a wraith, soaking wet, his face pale with terror. He didn't slow down. He threw himself from the saddle while the beast was still moving, sliding in the mud to reach her. Elara. His voice was raw, cracking with something that sounded nothing like anger. He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing, burying his face in her freezing neck. I have you. I have you. He didn't take her back to the manor. It was too far. He kicked open the door of a dilapidated hunting lodge nearby, carrying her inside. He laid her on the dusty rug before the hearth and frantically set about building a fire. His hands, usually so steady, were shaking. Once the flames caught, he stripped off his sodden coat and turned to her. You need to get warm. Now. He hesitated only a moment before pulling her against him. He didn't undress her. He simply wrapped his immense, heat-radiating body around her shivering form, sharing his warmth. For a long time, there was only the sound of the crackling fire and their ragged breathing. The hostility that had defined their reunion evaporated in the heat. I thought I lost you, he whispered into her hair, his grip tightening. When the mare came back alone. I thought. You would have been free of me, Elara murmured, her voice slurring slightly. Free of the wife who humiliated you. Sebastian pulled back, forcing her to look at him. The firelight softened the jagged line of his scar. Is that what you think? That I chased you to punish you? He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. I didn't come for revenge, Elara. I didn't come because of your brother or my pride. I chased you because for 4 years, that house has been a tomb. I walked its halls and saw your ghost in every room. I chased you because the silence without you was louder than any war. The fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows against the rough timber walls of the hunting lodge. The storm outside had been reduced to a distant, muffled drumming, but inside, the air was charged with a different kind of electricity. They lay tangled together on the rug, the damp wool of their clothes steaming in the heat. Sebastian hadn't moved away, even though the immediate danger of the cold had passed. His arm remained draped over her waist, a heavy, possessive weight that felt less like a cage and more like an anchor. Elara turned in his embrace, her ankle throbbing dully, but her attention fixed entirely on his face. In the amber light, the exhaustion was etched deep into his features. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow, but she knew he wasn't asleep. He was guarding her, even now. Her gaze traced the harsh line of his jaw, moving up to the scar that cleft his cheek. The mark that had terrified her 4 years ago, the mark Genevieve had called the brand of a monster. Trembling, she reached out. Her fingertips grazed the silvered skin. Sebastian flinched violently, his eyes snapping open. He jerked his head back, his hand coming up to shield his face, a reflex born of years of revulsion. Don't, he rasped, turning away. Do not force yourself to touch it. I know what I am. What are you? She asked softly, refusing to let him hide. She caught his hand, gently pulling it away from his face. Tell me what you see, Sebastian. A ruin, he said bitterly, staring at the floor. A beast that frightens women and children. A reminder of violence. I see a man who rode into a storm to save a wife who abandoned him, she countered. She moved closer, cupping his scarred cheek with her palm. He froze, his breath hitching, waiting for her to recoil. Instead, she leaned in and pressed her lips to the jagged ridge of skin. It was a soft kiss, barely a whisper of contact, but it shattered him. A low, broken sound tore from his throat. His hands came up to grip her waist, his fingers digging in with desperate strength. The ruthless beast dissolved, leaving only a man starving for a touch he believed he would never deserve. He crushed her to him, burying his face in her neck, inhaling her scent like a drowning man grasping for air. "Elara," he groaned, his voice wrecked. The kiss that followed was not the gentle exploration of the first. It was an avalanche. His mouth captured hers with a hunger that bordered on pain, tasting of smoke and desperation. Elara kissed him back, opening to him, her hands tangling in his damp hair. The heat between them flared, terrifying and absolute. He moved over her, his weight pressing her into the rug, and for a moment, she thought he would take what he had been denied for 4 years. Then, he stopped. With a groan of supreme effort, Sebastian pulled back. He rested his forehead against hers, his chest heaving, his eyes black with desire but clear with resolve. "No," he whispered, his voice rough. "Not like this." "Sebastian," she breathed, confused, her body aching for him. "I will not take you as payment for a debt," he said, smoothing the hair from her face with a trembling hand. "I will not have you in my bed because you are afraid for your brother, or because you feel obligated. When you come to me, Elara, it will be because you choose to stay, because you want the beast, not just the title." He kissed her forehead, a benediction, then rolled away to stare into the fire, leaving her cold, bereft, and utterly certain that she had been wrong about everything. The fragile peace shattered 2 days after their return from the hunting lodge. Elara entered the grand foyer to find chaos. Servants stood in hushed clusters, eyes wide with alarm. In the center of the hall stood Sebastian, flanked by 2 footmen holding Elara's travel trunk, the very one she had packed 4 years ago. Beside him stood Lady Genevieve, her face a mask of tragic disappointment, clutching a velvet pouch. "I found it hidden in her trunk, Sebastian," Genevieve said, her voice trembling with theatrical sorrow. She upended the pouch. The family emeralds spilled out, clicking against the marble floor like accusations. She was planning to leave again. Tonight. And she intended to take your mother's legacy with her. Sebastian stood motionless. The warmth she had seen in the lodge was gone, replaced by the terrifying stillness of the beast. His face was a granite mask, eyes dark voids that absorbed the light. He looked at the jewels, then slowly lifted his gaze to Elara. The silence in the hall was deafening. It was the moment of judgment. The moment he should rage, should scream, should fulfill every whispered rumor of his cruelty. "Is this true?" His voice was a low rumble, devoid of inflection. Elara's heart slammed against her ribs. The evidence was damning. The old Elara, the terrified girl of 4 years ago, would have wept, begged, or fled. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She remembered the man who had covered her with his coat, the man who had stopped when she was willing. She stepped forward, crossing the distance until she stood directly before him. "No," she said, her voice ringing clear through the cavernous hall. "I packed no bag. I stole no jewels." She turned her gaze to Genevieve. "And I am not running. The evidence is plain." Genevieve snapped, her composure slipping. "She is a thief and a coward, Sebastian. Lock her up before she shames us again." "I am not a coward," Elara countered, turning back to her husband. "And I am not a thief. But there is a liar in this hall." She looked Sebastian dead in the eye. "Ask her, Sebastian. Ask her about the night I left. Ask her why she told me you were in the drawing room smashing vases, when I saw you in the stables." Sebastian's gaze flicked to his aunt. Genevieve flinched, a microscopic movement, but telling. "She is delirious," the older woman scoffed. Desperate lies. I was in the stables, Sebastian said softly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He turned fully toward his aunt, and the menace radiating from him was palpable. I stood in the rain until dawn, hoping she would return. I never entered the drawing room. Only you knew where the jewels were kept, Aunt. Genevieve paled. Sebastian, surely you don't trust this runaway over your own blood. This runaway, he snarled, stepping between Elara and his aunt, shielding his wife with his massive body, is my Duchess. And you have spent 4 years poisoning my house against her. He pointed to the door. The gesture was absolute. Leave. Now. If you are still on my land by sunset, I will forget that we share blood. Sebastian. Go. The roar shook the chandelier crystals. Genevieve shrank back, seeing the beast finally unleashed, not upon his wife, but in her defense. As the aunt fled, scattering servants in her wake, Sebastian turned back to Elara. The rage vanished from his eyes, replaced by a fierce, protective intensity. He reached out, his large hand trembling slightly as he cupped her face. You stayed, he whispered, as if he couldn't quite believe it. You stood your ground. I told you, she replied, covering his hand with hers. I am done running. The silence that followed Genevieve's departure was profound, the air clearing as if a window had been thrown open in a stifling room. Sebastian didn't move to embrace her. Instead, he walked to the heavy oak desk in the corner of the room, retrieved a familiar folded document, and held it over the flame of a nearby candle. Elara watched, breathless, as the paper curled and blackened, the ink of her brother's debt turning to ash. It is done, Sebastian said, brushing the soot from his fingers. Julian is free. The debt is paid. He looked at her, his expression guarded, his hands clasped behind his back to hide their trembling. And so are you, Elara. The bargain is void. I will not hold you here against your will any longer. If you wish to leave, the carriage will be ready within the hour. He was letting her go. After 4 years of waiting, after hunting her down, after the storm and the fire, he was opening the cage door. Elara looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the devastating hope he was trying to crush behind his eyes. She looked at the door leading to the cold, rainy night, to freedom, to a life of hiding. Then she looked at the master suite door. Without a word, she walked past him. She went to the main doors of the drawing room, closed them firmly, and turned the heavy iron key in the lock. The clack echoed through the room, final and absolute. Sebastian stilled. Elara, I told you once that I hated you, she said, walking slowly toward him. I was wrong. I hated the fear. I hated the lies. She stopped inches from him, reaching up to undo the clasp of her cloak, letting it pool on the floor. But I do not hate my husband. You are free to go, he choked out, though his eyes devoured her. I am, she agreed. She reached for his hand, pressing his palm against her racing heart. And I choose to stay. I choose you, Sebastian. The man, the scars, the beast, all of it. He broke. With a groan that sounded like a prayer, he swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet as his mouth captured hers. This time, there was no hesitation, no pulling back. He carried her to the settee, claiming her with a fierce, worshipful intensity that erased 4 years of silence. The storm raged outside, but inside, in the heat of their union, the shadows were finally banished by the fire of a love that had survived the dark. 4 years later, Blackwood Manor was unrecognizable. Light poured from every window, music spilling out onto the terrace where guests mingled in the warm summer air. The beast's lair had become the heart of northern society, alive with laughter and light. Elara stood on the balcony, radiant in sapphire silk, watching the dancers below. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, pulling her back against a solid, familiar chest. Sebastian rested his chin on her shoulder, his scarred cheek pressing against her skin without hesitation. He wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. He stood in the light, smiling, a true, easy smile that reached his eyes. "They are waiting for the Duke and Duchess to lead the waltz," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her neck. "Let them wait," Elara replied, leaning into his embrace, her hand resting over his on her waist. "I am exactly where I want to be." She had feared the beast in the dark, only to realize the darkness was merely a shadow cast by a man waiting to be loved. And in the light of the life they had built, there were no monsters left, only a husband who adored her, and the wife who had finally, truly, come home. A new story awaits you on the screen right now. Click it to discover another world of passion, heart, and unforgettable courage.